Welcome to Complex Creatures, exploring spirituality and the common good.
Norman Maclean. He was an author who spent his whole career teaching at the University of Chicago. But as an author, after his teaching retirement, he was finally able to put down into words great stories of his youth and great stories of tragedy. Stories that would make an impact in American society. Known as a sort of Hemingway-esque writer, Norman Maclean had a unique American spirit to his words and his sensibilities. He was a son of a Scotch-Canadian Presbyterian pastor. Most notably, if you've heard his name or only have a passing familiarity with him, you know him because he wrote the short story or the short novella that was turned into a film by Robert Redford called A River Runs Through It. There he has other stories that are all about tragedy and life in his beloved home state of Montana. It's fair to say that I got to know Norman Maclean a little bit through that film, A River Runs Through It, and then afterwards through the book, and then some of the lines in it filled my imagination for fishing. As a younger person, I decided to take up fly fishing, and I was enchanted with what he said about it, and I have been ever since. There are moments when you read him or when you watch the film where you get an underlying spiritual quality. Norman is trying to make sense of who people are, the mystery that is another human being, the mystery that is himself. There's the sense that in his own personal tragedy, where his brother Paul was murdered, he's trying to come to terms with the fact that he loved his brother, wanted more for him, but realizing that his brother is completely a concrete and irreplaceable other person, there is a way in which he will never be able to fully get to know or understand the plight of another, like his brother, who he loved so much. There's a tragedy and sorrow behind each word that he writes and a beauty. Recently, I was reading Christian Century, a magazine of reflection of Christian faith, and there's a lot of great things in there by poets and scholars and thinkers. And I came across a book review about Norman Maclean, about a new book by Rebecca McCarthy. She wrote Norman Maclean, A Life of Letters and Rivers. I discovered that she had written for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the newspaper in my home city, and I knew I had to read the book. It just, I have to say, is beautiful. It sings. It's all about her personal story about being a young girl in the South who had family living in Montana, her brother, and somehow her brother came to be friends with Norman Maclean. And when she would go visit her brother and sister-in-law, she would spend time with Norman. And Norman had heard that she was a writer, a wannabe writer, and so he began to take her under his wing. She was his project. He convinced her to move up to the University of Chicago to study there, and quite forcefully in some cases taught her how to write and how to think, how to mix a drink, walked her around Hyde Park. And many years later, she has gone back to remember those moments, to remember her life growing up and her family tragedy, and put it down with memories and reflections on who Norman was. When I read it, I knew that there was a spiritual center and core to the book. There was something that drew me. There's something about us complicated creatures when we think long enough about one another. There's something about it that is inherently mystical, diving into tragedy and person and character and getting behind what's going on with us all and how we rub up against one another in this world, how we make sense of time and experience that's deeply haunting. Norman once wrote that he's haunted by waters. This book is haunted by memory, by possibility of what could be, and maybe about what's not said. Here at Complex Creatures, the podcast where we reflect on spirituality, the good life, and frankly, friends, I just like hearing people's stories. Well, I got to speak to Rebecca McCarthy. She was sweet and insightful. In this interview I share with you now, you get to hear me even ask a few personal questions on how to write, on how hard writing can be for people like Norman Maclean. Makes me feel a little bit better that he had a hard time with it. He was so good. I have a hard time with it, but I doubt that I have any skill at all. Rebecca doesn't. She writes easily and well. It's a joy for her. And in this interview, you're going to hear some of the depth of Norman's character and reflection. You're going to hear some of his peccadillos. You're going to hear silly anecdotes, but there's stuff here. If you're interested in Norman Maclean or fly fishing or writing or life in America at a certain time, you'll find something here. If you're interested in memoir and history and biography and thinking behind things, there's something for you here. I commend this book to you. And the rest of what Rebecca's working on seems interesting as well. If you enjoy this podcast, would you please like it and share it with a friend? Subscribe. We just want to keep talking to people, finding interesting conversations and stories that maybe can make life as a complex creature a little bit more navigable, or maybe make a little bit more sense. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Rebecca. Peace be with you. Well, thank you for joining us today. I really, your book delighted me. As I
Oh,
think I messaged to you, I saw a review of it in Christian Century, and I got very excited because I love Norman Maclean, mostly because I watched that movie, A River Runs Through It, in the 90s when it came out. And then I became a fly fisherman, and then I read his stories, right? So, but
you became
there's
a fly fisherman because of the movie?
well, I already like fishing, right? And so growing up where I did in central Illinois, it really wasn't a place where fly fishing took, that wasn't a part of the way people fished around there. But it started getting more and more popular. People have been finding other ways to fly fish. And I started taking these trips to Arkansas with some fellows from our congregation to do some fishing on the White River. And that's when I started saying, you know what, gosh, I like that movie. I like that book so much. Maybe I ought to try it out there because there's a lot of fly fishermen. So anyway, it did give me the interest, and then I started trying to fly fish. So
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah. So when I saw it, I was so fascinated. I'm fascinated by Norman Maclean as an author, as a fisherman, and then of course, if anyone who knows his story at all knows that he comes from this really rich Scots Irish or Scots Presbyterian background, and his
Right.
dad plays an important role in that tale. So I thought maybe there might even be some spiritual components to it. But your book is so fascinating. It seems to be part biography and part memoir. Is that fair? Would you assess it that way, or how would you describe what you've written?
Um, I describe it as being a witnessed biography. And I
Ah,
had to put myself in the story to show you how Norman was, how he walked around and what he did and how we talked. And I didn't, so I, what it is a bunch of stories. I wrote one version, which was a strictly chronological version, and it was really terrible. I mean, it was just so boring. And so then I only had like 3 months, and the editor said, okay, you know, I thought to myself, fish or cut bait. So I rewrote the whole thing as if I was telling stories about Norman because it's not chronological.
no.
It's circular and it goes in a circle and circle and circle like that. And at some point after I left the university and graduated, I stepped out of the story. But I was still in touch with Norman and saw him as often as I could. But I didn't live in Hyde Park anymore, so I didn't see him on a regular basis.
Well, so the story is really about I mean, you're telling the life and some of the career of Norman Maclean, the professor at the University of Chicago, author of A River Runs Through It and other stories. But you're telling about it from your really unique experience of knowing him, being a child and going out to visit family in Montana. That's where you had occasion to meet him. And then he took a liking for who you were. He took like a pedagogical sort of role in your life. So it felt like, on the one hand, as you told the story about him coaxing you to the University of Chicago and him teaching you about Chicago, it felt a little bit like it was a coming of age for you. At the very same time, it seemed to be this great retrospective on his life's work
Yeah.
as
Well,
an educator.
his wife had died and he was lonely. His daughter and son-in-law had their own lives. They had a new baby. And Norman was very careful about intruding on people. I mean, he didn't want to intrude. So he was kind of lonely. And, I
Mm.
filled the void for him because I was the hayseed, a hick. I don't know if a hick,
Yeah.
I just wasn't very sophisticated. And um, not that I'm super sophisticated now, but I was, his friends have said I was a project for him, kind of a,
Mm.
Pygmalion kind of thing.
So the first real question I wanted to ask is, like, why now? Why now did you write these stories at this point in your life and career?
Uh,
Since so much of it took place when you were a teen and then a college student at the University of
well,
Chicago.
you have to have some perspective. And also, I mean, it's not now. I started gathering string on Norman 30 years ago,
Mm.
and it took a long time to get access to his papers. His son did not want me to have access.
Oh, really?
No. And finally, his sister convinced him and that I should have access. So then there was going to Chicago and being there, finding the time away from my family and my full-time job to do that, to go
Mm.
there. And then, but I had already started talking to people in, well, Anna about who are still alive, who were in Norman Danny's church, and people in Missoula who remembered the McLean family. And, had to go to libraries there and be in touch with them. I mean, it's a lot of moving parts. If you look at the note in the back of the book, it'll show
Mm.
you what I had to do. I went to Hanover, New Hampshire, to Dartmouth, um, to look at the materials, and it's called the Walker Library, and just kind of see where Norman was. Now, I don't know if you've ever been there. It's really small, kind of a closed-in, like Dartmouth
Mm.
is. And it was hard to kind of picture Norman there, but he was there.
Mm.
And it was interesting to see where he had chafed against the 12 and the Joe Colleges. So
Yeah.
that took time, and I got a lot of information. I had to sift through from people who had Norman as a teacher and who had known him, and then one person leads to another, leads to another. But I think I used to dream about Norman, and
Really?
he would haunt me in my dream and tell me, get going. You have to get going. Truly, he obviously doesn't haunt me anymore. But when COVID hit, I thought, well, this is the time, even though it was bad because my kids were all, home schooling with computers, and that was a fail. Um, but I didn't have to make excuses to friends or anything because I could just stay home. It was hard to get. If I needed something from a library, it took forever to get it. But
Right.
I mean, I mean, I could have continued getting information, but I finally just thought, that's it. I'm, I'm just going to write what I have. So that's what I did.
And you did. I mean, I think it's beautiful. I really do. I would commend you on it. On page 32 in the book, you specifically said something that made me both smile and sort of grimace. You said the Calvinist in him hated failure. And you said that in reference to how he felt disappointed by people, loved ones and family members, people who went through divorce or any sort of thing seen as a failure. I sort of smiled because anytime, personally, from my own spiritual and theological background, I love to kind of poke at Calvinists a little bit. But at the very same time, I grimace because of that very real weightiness that must have been to be his friend or his loved one, to
Oh,
know that
yeah.
you can be so easily disappointed.
Yeah.
Did you feel that weight of disappointment ever from him?
Oh, sure. I talk about it in there, although I didn't
Sure.
know it at the time. But yeah, he jumped on me one time for a paper I had written on a Browning poem, which was stupid on my part to ever write about Browning because he loved Browning.
Uh,
And he knew Browning like that. I mean, he knew he could
Back.
recite those long narrative poems almost word by word. And oh my God, that was horrible. But no, not till I started doing this and really looking at letters I didn't have that he had written to other people that were in his papers. He checked up on every single class I had. Want to know how I
Really?
was? Yeah, yeah. They all reported. It was like a network of spies. It was
And then
was
the amount of interest he showed you as a student planning to go to school and talk to you and wanting to show you Chicago. I mean, on the one hand, what an invitation and how exciting to have somebody say, "Hey, I'd like to even show you how to do this and show you how to
well. He
enter
didn't
into
say
this
that.
world."
He didn't.
Okay.
He never said that. It was just you know coming to school and here. I mean, a lot of it I found from friends and just going out into the city and
Uh,
exploring on my own. He had a car which we didn't have, and we would go to restaurants that it would take. Well, the Middle East Club, I couldn't have gotten there safely if they in a
mm.
car. I mean, it was really a sketchy neighborhood, terrible
Yeah,
neighborhood.
I'm familiar with the neighborhoods. That's my old stomping ground. So I'm familiar. I mean, I could see where you were in my mind's eye.
Where did you grow up? Like Bloomington?
Yeah, I grew up in central Illinois, but I've lived in the Chicagoland area, and I loved when I was in seminary in a small town called Lincoln for my master's degree. I used to go up to the University of Chicago Divinity School quite a lot, to the
Oh,
co-op library.
oh yeah.
There's all kinds of bookstores around Hyde Park, and that
But
was
are you
always
still? Still a member of the Seminary Co-op bookstore. Are you a member?
yes.
I mean, it's terrible. But I read there in the spring, but it's terrible because it's like you get this little notice, you have $10 in credit. And I'm like, oh, good, I can spend more money. And then you do. And then it's like, hey,
Yeah.
it's bad. Well, they
It,
need a director if you would like to apply.
well, it was a wonderful place for sure.
Yeah.
But going back to some of his Calvinist, maybe mentality, I often thought when I read him that there was, I mean, it's very true, very obvious. You could see some of that Calvinist and almost that that uh, that kind of almost a harsh work ethic that comes with it sometimes. But I also sense a bit of sacramentality to him. Um, just the way he talks about the waters and the rocks, the way he saw the extraordinary and ordinary things. Is that a good sense, or is that just him being a kind of a romantic poet?
And
Uh,
I would say both.
mhm.
He was very, I just wrote an essay for a publication called Literary Hub, Lit Hub, about what I learned about women on my tour. And, people told me, and there was one woman who had taken care of his apartment in the summer when he was in Montana. And he was showing her how to polish. She had a teak table. After his mother died, he and Jesse got her phone. And he was showing her how to polish this table, and it had to be done a certain way. And that's the way he was with everything. There was a right way to do it, which was his way, and there was a wrong way, which was your way. And so you had to know and learn his way and then do it his way. And it was true for fishing, writing, uh, making a drink.
Drinking, right? I caught a lot of those stories in
I
the
mean,
book.
just there's right, but I mean, it came down to polishing the furniture. It was like there were lots of rituals in Norman's life, and for whatever reason,
Yeah.
um, I can remember I would go over for dinner, and everything. He would have food in the crock pot, and it all. I don't know. If you ever make the meat dishes in the crock pot, they'd
Hmm.
always kind of taste the same. They were kind of meat and carrot and potatoes, and then sour cream and parsley, and it's kind of the glop. It's tasty.
Yeah.
It could have always been the same. And then I would make, it would be, he would tint, he liked to tint his hands. And he
Uh,
would, Rebecca dear, we have a nice stew in the crock pot. And we have some crusty rolls, and you can heat them and make us a salad. And that's it. That's the way that he would talk. And kind of go, okay. Um, if you ever want to hear his voice, Studs Terkel recorded this hour-long interview with him, and it's online. You can find it.
Okay.
Legit Studs Terkel, Norman Maclean, and you'll hear his
Okay.
strange voice. He had a very
Well,
strange voice.
I've never heard it, but I have a voice in my mind. I'm sure it's wrong based on your writing, and it's a lot of hello, my dear. It's so
No, it's not. It's not that melodious. It kind of goes
ah.
up at the end. Rebecca dear, it's kind of
Okay.
drawn out. His parents were Canadian. He didn't say a beat, but it's kind of, how would I describe it? It's like the syllables were emphasized and the speech was kind of slow. I mean, he would say, like if we're talking to you, he would say, Jarrod, so you become a minister. And then it would be he used a lot of pauses in talking unless he was making a point, like on on the cover of the book, making a point about Shakespeare. That's what he's doing on the cover of the book. But anyway, back to talking about Shakespeare. So I'm sorry, I got off track of your questions.
That's okay.
But,
Well, here, let me ask this question. He said you recorded him saying that writing is hard and torturous.
For him, yeah.
Is it for you?
Not
as a
really.
writer?
I've been doing stories and writing since I was a child, and it's not really. The more you do it, as you might know, the easier it gets. And I read a lot, and I had really good teachers from my 9th grade English teacher and my 11th grade English teacher I would stack them against anybody I had in college as far as writing and grammar and analysis goes. Well, maybe not, but definitely writing and grammar. And I had great teachers at Chicago. And, that's what you do there. You write papers. And when I was a reporter, I was working on a long story, and somebody said, God, it's just so long. How are you doing? And I just started laughing. And I said, 1/4, which is 10 weeks at college, I wrote 250 pages of papers. So this is nothing. They were like,
For me, it's hard and torturous, and I think that's because
you self-edit like Norman
they
did.
do.
You self-edit.
Well, I'm a natural storyteller and I'm a natural talker, but sitting down alone to write, it does something to me. So
you might tape yourself, tape your stories, and then hear them.
Yeah.
Norman. It was hard for Norman also. But then, do you read aloud what you write?
Yeah, sometimes.
If you do it all the time, it'll help you. I read everything I write out loud. I mean, Norman read me a lot of his stories before they were published. And when you hear it, it's different from when you write it.
something about how he wrote and what he was fascinated about writing. It was interesting to me hearing about his life from your perspective and thinking about what he's written. Norman seems very place-based. In philosophy, there's a lot of work that's been happening the past couple of decades on place-based thinking. So place being more than just geography, but places with story and culture and time and history all kind of stacked up, right? But like whether it's Hyde Park or Sealy Lake or Chicago in general, like he seemed to be very invested
Yeah,
in
I would say that's true.
place.
That's true.
Yeah, he fell in love with those places. I mean,
Well,
quite clearly, right?
he also,
Chicago.
yeah, oh yeah, he loves Chicago. I think he, he had his great loves were his family, Montana, his country, and the University of Chicago. And that was his family and friends, I should say, his country, Montana, and the University of Chicago. That was about it. It was a tiny, tiny circle. But I think he felt responsible for Montana. Montana it really bugged him. It's an extraction economy. And he used to say of all the resources that Montana loses, the worst is the loss of its educated men and women. Because everybody Norman knew, except the guy who's Ted Jacobs, whose dad owned the bank, everybody left. His generation, they had to leave. And it's kind of still true. The people who are going to Montana now are hedge fund managers and horrible people. I mean, they're horrible. I'm sorry, but sorry, hedge fund, but they're the people.
They're buying up all the land, right?
Well, they're stopping. They're buying up land, and in many cases, they're trying to stop public access to the state's waters, which is against the law. Yeah.
I imagine him, and maybe this is incorrect, but I imagine sort of being a wandering sage as he leads you around Chicago in the winters. And I kind of joked a little as he opened.
It was mostly just Hyde Park.
Really? And you said he'd pull out like a beverage, like an adult beverage, if you will,
Well,
right?
he liked hot tea with bourbon in it.
Okay.
It's a good drink. I mean, I hadn't had a drink in almost 10 years. I thought, what's the point for me? Because I was never a big drinker. I probably drank more when I was in college with Norman than I have all the years after added up together.
Yeah.
But it's a good drink when it is, as you know, you grew up in Illinois.
Yeah.
I mean, it gets your bones get cold. And walking by the lake, I mean, Norman, he's fine. And I'm sitting there just going, it's something out of a cartoon, where your words come out and they're frozen and then they fall down. But my last year of school, fourth year, we lived at, I and my roommates, we lived at 56th and Blackstone. And so it was a mile. I worked at the library at Regenstein early, and I had to find this apartment building with a doorman. The guy let me stand in the doorway for a few minutes because I would literally felt like my eyeballs were freezing. It was really cold. Norman never reacted to the cold. Never. He just was like Mr. Magoo. He just walked along, and
You said he often asked the question, who the hell am I?
Always.
Do you find that to be, I just asked, this is a strange question. Is that a comforting thought to you, or is that a disquieting sort of thought that he always asked that, like a man would be of his skill and age and learning and still ask that question? Do you think he ever found out who he was? Maybe I should
think
ask
probably at the end of his life he did. I think he was satisfied. Oh, it was great. I mean, it lets you off the hook. Because, kids, teenagers, they think, God, when am I ever going to figure it out? And then Norman's like, you're never going to figure it out. And you go, great. That's great, because you don't have to worry about figuring it out.
Or always becoming, right?
Right. I mean, it happens as you're going along. You figure out who you are and what matters
Mm.
to you. And Norman finally, I think, unlike me, the best thing, financially, it's not been good, but the best thing I ever did was leave the Journal-Constitution, because it is a horrible environment for somebody who writes poetry and who writes, because it's a real mill of demand and demands, and it was not good for me to be there. It did not help my writing. It took me years to recover from it.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Mm.
it did. I mean,
You say some.
I got no much to go about me, but I got skills there, as far
Mhm.
as reporting. And poor Norman, when he wrote Young Men and Fire, he didn't. He was stepping into a hornet's nest. He didn't know what he was in for, and
Mm.
the Forest Service had tried to cover up what had happened, and treated the parents of the lost firefighters really badly. And learning all that, it really bothered him, because he had loved the Forest Service, and it really bothered him a lot.
Yeah, you say on like page 194, he told Nick Lyons, he's saying this, "Never again will I try to write a story that is historically accurate in every detail. It is clear to me that the universe in its trunculence doesn't permit itself to be that well known. At my age, I should have known that, but at my age, I no longer have the choice of turning back."
Yeah.
He seemed to be rather stifled in some way by being just
Right.
kind of a journalist, right?
Well, I think what it was he could not understand the mathematics of fire.
Mm.
He couldn't understand uh, thermodynamics, which is what you need to understand what happened to the people at Man Gulch. And
Mm.
it was frustrating to him. I mean, he had very little math instruction. I mean, Jesse did the taxes, and Jesse did all the computation for the family. And when she died, then he turned to Jean, his daughter, to do all that for him. He just
Mm.
had no skill. It's interesting. I recently was in the offices of the University of Georgia. There is a United States Forest Service research group here, and they research prescribed fire, and on kind of it wasn't part of their duties, but they did a computer model, as best you can do for fire, because there's so many variables: soil, moisture, vegetation moisture, wind direction, topography, um, moisture in the air, any kind of rain, uh, you know, what the fire starts off with, what the fuels are it hits. And they realized that um, Norman, I think, have you read Young Men and Fire?
Mm-hmm.
You know, he started out thinking that Wag Dodge's backlit little cheap fire had 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 burned one of the people, Bill Hellman, and he was saying that fire went up slope, but it did. The
Mm.
model, this is the definitive this information. The fire went laterally. You're frozen. Okay, there you are. But the fire,
Yeah.
instead of going like this upslope, it went laterally, which is
Okay.
interesting. And anyway, but Norman was so frustrated, because he didn't trust that he had the right version of things. And he
Hmm.
kept writing that chapter over and over and over. And
It's like he was haunted by these things. Yeah.
he was haunted by the dead
Yeah.
firefighters.
Which is really what he was writing about. I mean,
He's writing
yeah.
about himself. He's writing about
Yeah.
himself. And
Oh,
I
wow.
found this may interest you. I'm close to Norman's son-in-law, Joel Snyder. I
Mm.
message him almost daily, and he said, I just found this sentence at the end of Young Men and Fire, and I think he said, "This is for him, for Joel, he thinks Norman is offering a prayer. And here it is. The evidence then is that at the very end, beyond thought and beyond fear and beyond even self-compassion and divine bewilderness, there remains some firm intention to continue doing forever and ever what we last hoped to do on earth. Isn't that beautiful? And I sort of think that's what Norman himself was doing with going over and over and over the information he was talking about with Nick.
Wow. That is a deep insight. There's some stuff in there in your work about what he thought about language that I found interesting. On kind of a humorous level, he loved to swear, or he had a way with swearing.
He was, as his friends say, Norman was immensely but not obscene. You know, he never made reference to the female body parts ever. Never. But the male body parts, yeah, mostly it was the words bastard and the old Anglo-Saxon word, 4-letter word that everyone seems to say now. I mean, golly. And yeah, I mean, it was, but you have a child too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and I guess he came up that.
I thought it was humorous when you said that maybe he thought that may be why his dad wasn't more happy in life, because his dad, as a reverend, was confined to a life without swearing.
Right. Scotchmen are programmed for profanity, and he couldn't do it.
But more humorous to me than that was not humorous, just curious. Is he didn't seem to enjoy adjectives.
No. He didn't enjoy adverbs.
Adverbs. Oh, I must have just misread that as I read. So he didn't enjoy adverbs. How come?
Because he thought they were redundant. If you had to rely on an adverb, your writing was very weak. You know, he wanted you. That's telling instead of showing. You know, and if someone's saying she said expectantly, that would be terrible. She said her eyebrows went up and her hands, he wanted to see instead of you telling. So I think adverbs were, they were just verboten. I mean, I use almost no adverbs. I'm sorry, adverbs. I just don't use them. And you could have a few. You'll love this. He loved the 23rd Psalm. He thought it was he loved the King James. You know, he was reared on the King James version of the Bible. And he said, I forget, it's like 162 words. He would go, 162 words. That bastard, he could do it. And I would go, okay. And he goes, and that whole effing poem, there are 2 adjectives, still and green. And then he made this noise all the time. He would go, I don't know what that meant.
Oh, yeah. So he's focused on how there was all verbs and nouns in that psalm, and he was enamored with that.
Oh yeah, that was how you wrote.
Too many adjectives would be lazy,
right, and redundant.
Wow.
Right. His father, when you talk about Calvinism, that's why Norman really didn't write till he was retiring. He started before he retired. He wrote a couple of stories. But I think, he just thought nothing he wrote was good enough. It just, he could hear the condemning father who did it come across to you that I did not like the Reverend?
Actually, no, I didn't think that you came across that so you don't like him, is what you're saying.
No, I think he was horrible for Norman and for Paul.
Oh, I thought you were fair. At least I read it that way. And
okay. Yeah, good. I mean, that's good. But I think that he, I have a friend in Athens here who runs a recovery center, and he's the Methodist minister, and he believes, and I have come to believe, behind every addiction there's trauma. And I don't know what the trauma was that Paul experienced, but he had many addictions. He was a gambling addict and probably an alcoholic. And, you know, the dad was so hypercritical. He was critical of Norman's mom and her cooking, and she was a fabulous cook and she could have run a bakery. She was an unbelievable baker. And
Mm.
everybody in the community loved her. I mean, she was just one of those people who was magnetic, and Norma did too. And maybe the Reverend was jealous or something, but he would just kind of put her down at home all the time.
Oh,
And
I unfortunately I'm one of those. I love a good film. People
yeah,
ask me. Some people ask me today if I watch these different Jesus movies, and I don't tell them the full truth, and it's mostly that I just don't enjoy watching that for entertainment personally. That's the first thing. But
right,
when I give them an answer that I want to give, the reason why I don't watch a lot of that is because I don't really want my conception of Jesus or the disciples to be based on, actors and images that I've seen from the screen. I'd rather live in my mind based on what I'm seeing in the text. And I think I have that little bit of that issue with reading A River Runs Through It. I started with the film, so it's hard for me not to imagine Tom Skerritt as his father. It's hard for me not to imagine Brad Pitt being Paul. And your book, to be very frank, is the first time I had the straight fact about how Paul really passed in
yeah,
Chicago, not in Montana.
right,
And I get it. It makes some sense that it's not a straight biographical tale. It's a genre that's blending real stuff with just, but told in a way to tell a particular story, perhaps for a particular purpose that blends things together. And I was just gonna say I had a hard time getting out of those thoughts sometimes when you were saying stuff about his father. I would imagine the film.
yeah. Well, his dad was complicated, and
Hmm.
he was real smart, and he probably should have been teaching at a seminary. I think that would have fed him intellectually. I think he was a little frustrated. I mean, he loved being in Montana and fishing and
Mm.
being outdoors and being with friends. And there were lots of Scottish people in Missoula when he was there. And one girl told me when he and his best friend was a wool merchant who had a lot of sheep named Scotty Brown. And when they would get together and have a touch of the old Scotch, they would lapse into this rogue, and they were unintelligible. They would be speaking the Scots language, which is really unintelligible. So, but the Scottish Gaelic is what
Yeah.
they would talk. Um, so I sort of feel sorry for the Red, but
Mm.
he wasn't physically brutal, but he was like, I believe, now this is me just making this out of whole cloth, but based on Norman always feeling like he was inadequate and Paul hell-bent on self-destruction. I just think there was a darker side to the Reverend than Norman wanted to give people.
You say that Norman was mourning what his brother Paul could have been.
Yeah.
That haunts me when I read that.
Yeah. His
I
brother
don't even have a
wrote,
question.
you can find Paul's writing online. I didn't put it in because it's so easily accessible, but he wrote so easily. I mean, Norman was offended by the people at Dartmouth. They put him down. Paul just kind of laughed it off. As soon as he graduated, he started giving Dartmouth money. He did not give them one thin dime until they did a portrait of him in the alumni magazine. After he did, he never gave him a penny, and he would never talk about Dartmouth. I would ask questions, and he would go, "I don't want to talk about that." Never. He would never talk about it. So
Who did he think Paul could have been?
I don't know. I think I think he thought he was his companion through life, you know, and that was taken away. I don't really know to ask those kind of questions. I mean, the man was so gifted. I mean, he was just likable. Women liked him, men liked him, old people. He was very prolific of his parents. Um, People at Chicago, at the university where he worked, liked him. I mean, he was just one of these people everybody liked. And people like that are often addicts, because they know what you want to hear and they give you what you want. Um, uh, he was a wonderful reporter in Montana. I mean, he
Mm.
he wrote a lot. He wrote most of this paper, the Montana Independent. I think it was the Independent. It was in Helena, and I don't know. I don't know what he would have become.
I have this this I
He was
think some
he
of
was
the
more handsome than Brad Pitt, though. I tell you that he was.
he was handsome in that photo you have in the book. I have this sense. I feel like a way in which both the book, the story, A River Runs Through It, and the way the film lay out the story. One of the ways it kind of taught me or nudges me spiritually. Um, is in the question that Norman asks of himself or says about what he says about himself often is who the hell am I? Like asking that, like there's never this easy to nail down sense of self, but it's also true of other people. People are still always a mystery. There's still more, and why that's helpful for me or has been helpful for me in the past is it can be very frustrating to try to help serve people and you get frustrated at choices they make, but realizing that there's a mystery to them that you will never fully grasp or fully contain in your mind. So
Right,
there's always a sense where you have to kind of step back and say, they are who they are or who they're becoming, and you have
right.
and
And you can't do
it is
anything about it.
it's to respect the unfathomable mystery of another human being and their
Yeah,
dignity in that regard.
I think so. I think that's exactly right. Even if that is yourself.
Mm.
He loved this little poem that said, it was something like, uh, God, I'll forgive your little joke on me if you forgive my joke on thee. It's probably from his parents, it sounds like it. But he was well versed in scripture.
Well, you
And
say he was molded by the church, but he was mostly an agnostic. Is that right?
after he left Missoula and went to, I would say it was happening when he was in school, but mostly it happened when he went to graduate school.
Was that intellectual? Was that
I don't know. I just think
social?
he saw enough of things that, the dad in those days was he was part of the elect. And
Mm,
Norman just could not believe that the God his dad believed in separated the sheep and, you know, divided
mm,
people into you're the elect and you're the damned. He just
mm,
didn't. But that was the Presbyterian theology and the Calvinist theology in those days.
mm.
But I think that I'm not sure where he lost it. I'll ask Joel if he had some idea because when Norman was the last 3 years of his life, he pretty, he had a lot of health issues, especially the last year. He was in a hospital bed in the living room. I'll ask
Mm.
Joel about that, but Norman believed in other people and he
You
believed
believe in
in,
other people.
in nature. And he
Mhm.
would, I can remember a religious experience I had one time when I was ordained in I became I don't know what it is anymore. I've been in the Episcopal Church for so long and I can't remember, but at some point we were laying on hands at the Presbyterian Church and I just felt like I mean, it sounds weird. I felt like this I'm feeling Christ
Hmm.
laying hands on each other. It was really moving, and I'm still close to the people who were in that club, so to speak.
Uh-huh.
But I think Norman, um, I know you know, he loved nature, and he saw nature as God's creation. So I would say Norman was an agnostic, or maybe a deist, probably a deist.
What did for you? I appreciate your story, your personal experience, but what did this writing do in you in a rather spiritual or an internal way to analyze your own memory and history and this person that you knew? Did it did it bring you into any deeper connection with yourself or with memory, or what? How would you
Oh,
describe the
sure,
process?
sure, all of that. Some of the memories were sad, like remembering my sister-in-law who
Hmm.
died so young. It's just, to me, such a tragedy. And it helped shape me uh, spiritually when people said, it's God's. I just want to say crap.
Mm.
So uh,
Are you
I mean,
familiar with that book called "Everything Happens for a Reason" and Other Lies I've Loved?
yeah, Kate Ballard, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I love her. I'm
yeah.
doing
She's
it.
great.
I'm doing a Lenten thing with
Uh-huh.
her online.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she's great, but that title is also just so wonderful. I mean, my
yeah.
my sweet sister-in-law is 37, and we just found out she's pregnant, and she happens to also just found out she has breast cancer, and it's pretty far along. It's in her bones.
Oh my God.
She's having a biopsy today, and there's a lot of fear and complication, but and she's a very committed Catholic, and her parish is very tight. But the amount of things that you hear well-intentioned folks say, well-intentioned people of faith say, you just shake your head and you think we would do we would do well to have just a crash course and maybe what we just say to people when they're suffering or they're scared.
How
Uh,
far along is she pregnant?
she's towards the end of the first trimester, and this is her seventh child, which makes most people go, "Oh my gosh!" But they're very traditional Catholics, so this is a very welcome thing. Um, and it's the case right now where the estrogen in her body is actually causing the spread.
Mm,
So it's tied to the hormones, and thankfully she has a meeting at Loyola in Chicago because they're these little hospitals in Grand Rapids, and I think they're getting some better help now and some hospital systems that have more caseload. But I think someone came to their house with photographs of their mom and put them in frames and just said, "Well, just for the boys, so they could always look at their mom when she's not here." Like basically, I mean, it's a
ugh,
sweet gesture, but we're
no,
far from that. We're far from that, by the way.
yeah, that's
So
golly. That
I know.
I, you know, I have a distant cousin who is still around who had that same diagnosis, and I
Mm.
forget what she took. She took something, or maybe she had surgery. She had surgery, and then in like maybe the 8th month, they did a C-section, and she had big drugs, and she's still with us. So the baby's
I
10. Let's hope that happens for your
I
sister-in-law.
have I have great hope. I wanted to read. This is what I think is the spiritual heart of your book.
Okay.
And now I realize that is a bold statement to make.
Well,
But
let's see if you got it right.
well, I don't know. How about this? Let me say this is for me from my experience of reading it,
Okay.
the spiritual heart. So what I was taking from it that was landing some of the. So I've been still trying to describe the book to people. I said there's some memoir and there's history and there's biography, but you're dealing with layers of depth of the human experience where I'm able personally to read this and pull out um, interesting history. I learned stuff about writing, But then I have spiritual reflection as I read it. So, I mean, to me, that's a compliment to you to tell you
Thank you.
that. So, on page 208, the very bottom, he said, Norman saw events like my sister-in-law's death at 29 as part of a bigger story. Something my family would cope with for years that would change me, my brother, and others I loved in profound and permanent ways. He could see the extraordinary in the ordinary. I think at the end of his life, he finally figured out who he was, a storyteller who wrote books centered on tragedy and guided by compassion. I sensed that was the spiritual heart of the book.
I
You
think
think
so.
I missed it?
No, I think you hit it on the nail. Hit the
And
nail on the head.
and I have to ask this question of you as a writer, and maybe this is a bit of advice. I've been trying my hand at a little memoir writing recently. Uh, a year and a half ago, I had a liver transplant. And yeah, I went through this very dramatic sickness that I didn't know I was sick, and lots of stuff happened in a very short period of time. And for me, it's the journey was as much spiritual as it was physical. And as I'm writing about it, I find myself changing my perspective a little bit, or growing in my self understanding as I write. And I wonder, if you write something like this, do you have to start knowing the answers to your questions, or can you discover as you're writing?
I think the second option.
Okay. Because
Wow.
that might be some reason why I drag feet on writing it. It's hard, it's emotional, it's not,
Right.
and it's just like when I read that about what you said about Norman, that he told storyteller who wrote books centered on tragedy, guided by his compassion. Now he might be talking about other people's stuff, but I try to write compassionately about these real things, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm not sure if I've gotten there yet, which confessionally is the reason why it took me far longer than I would like to admit to write the letter that they ask you to write or invite you to write to your donor family. I had a hard time sitting down and saying, to whom it may concern, thank you, because I kept building it up in my head as I had to have some sort of thing to say that would be worth it. And then at some point I realized I would not have anything that would that would measure up to the gift, right?
Yeah.
And
Well, and,
so
and Lamont said there's really only one prayer. Thank you.
mhm, I like Anne Lamott as well.
Yeah. But I
Very
think,
well.
I think, uh, you know, maybe you've done this or maybe you haven't. You kind of have to grieve for your own body.
Mm,
You have to grieve for it. I had peritonitis years ago, and 25 years ago, you know, and I didn't know till it was over. I mean, when it was discovered, my husband took me to the hospital. They didn't even admit me. They stuck an
mm.
IV in me and administered big, big drugs because I had a fever of 104
Oh,
4 days. I went in on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Finally, on Friday, when the fever broke, and my husband had gone home at last to take a shower and change his clothes. And my aunt was there holding my hand, and I said, Aunt Lucy, and she goes, well, I'm glad to see, we talked and stuff. And then when I stayed till Monday, and when I left, I thanked this one nurse who was fabulous. She was retiring in a few days. I got her right before she retired. And I said, Mrs. Count, her name is Julia Council. And I said, Mrs. Council, thank you for helping me. And she said, honey, we thought you were leaving in a box. And I thought,
wow.
good grief. I mean, it was horrifying. And you have to grieve for your own body, what happened to it. I sometimes think of it as a house where you're living.
Mm.
You're living in your house. And sometimes, like you had to replace the whole sewage system or the air filters.
Right, right.
And the house was fumigated, with infection. So,
Uh,
no, when you get done, I'll edit it for you if you like.
well, I'd love for you to take a look. Listen, I really think that this book sings. It's beautiful, and I really appreciate it. Are you working on anything right now?
Uh, I'll send you a profile I did of someone.
Okay.
that it's almost done. I
Yeah.
write for money, so
Yeah.
I'm doing those kind of stories. I want to do a biography of somebody, of
Yeah.
a woman named Harriet Powers, and you can Google her. But one of my daughters says, "Mommy, you ought to write a bunch of little stories about all of your adventures." So I'm thinking, I might do that. I don't know, but the one about Harriet Powers, it really interests me. But I tell you, since this book was out, that's what I've been doing, is interviewing and
Yeah.
stories. And it's a full-time job. So just get ready. If you, I could book like what you didn't talk about, but a book about, spirituality in the face of death, and how do you deal with that? But needing a liver transplant, that's a big deal. A friend of mine here got one, and she was the color of mustard
Right.
before she got it. It was horrifying.
Mm.
And now she's pink again. She's a white person and she's pink.
Yeah.
And yeah, you could write a very useful book. I don't know that you want to. You have to make it meaningful for you. But
Yeah.
a book, I'll send you some things. I think ways to think about it.
Well,
'Cause it's
thank
hard.
you.
It's hard to get out of your own head and your own body. It's
Yeah.
hard.
Yes, I would love that. Thank you for your time. Thank you for introducing me more to a writer that meant something to me, and I really appreciate your time today, Rebecca.